All right, Dave, with the Wolf Report, your noontime, noonish, could be right at 12 o'clock, or might be slightly after. Just depends on when we load it in. But we appreciate you watching the Wolf Report, where we cover a little bit of news, a little bit of sports, and some good news. I'd like to close out the show with good news. We got a neat one today. Is that good to say these days? Neat. Maybe I'm a little old for saying neat, but I think it's neat. And it's about disabled and some things that they're doing. I love the National Park Service. Don't always love what they do, but I love the park system. I love the parks. They're beautiful. I wish I'd been to all of them, but I do like what they've done. We'll get to that in just a few minutes. Let's look at the news. And it's not so good starting out because the national debt, yes, it now exceeds 40 trillion. Trillion. That's Trillion. If you don't know how to spell it, I doubt you've ever signed a check with the T word, trillion, for the first time ever. That amount is approaching the size of the entire U.S. economy, with publicly held debt already exceeding 100% of the gross domestic product, or the GDP. The $40 trillion figure represents the cumulative result of decades of federal borrowing, rather than the policies of any single administration. They've all done it. There's nobody gets a pass. They all try to blame the other. Every single one of them. Some of them may have paid down some things. They've all the debt has just continued to rise. And so, generations through wars, recessions, as this Newsmax article says, tax changes, and the expansion of major federal benefit programs under presidents of both parties. The Treasury Department reported that the total public debt outstanding reached about 40.047 trillion on Tuesday, according to the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. The number is striking, but the more significant measure for economists is debt held by the public, money the federal government owes to investors and other entities outside the federal government. That figure is approaching the size of the entire U.S. economy. Wow. That's sad. The United States has carried debt since its founding, when the young nation borrowed heavily to finance the Revolutionary War. For much of American history, however, federal debt remained relatively modest compared with the size of the economy, and often rose sharply during wars or economic emergencies before declining during periods of peace and economic growth. That pattern changed substantially during the 20th century as the federal government took on broader responsibilities, things they weren't supposed to do either. Social Security became a permanent part of the federal budget. Medicare was established in the 1960s, and the government's role in healthcare, retirement benefits, national defense, and other areas continued to expand. Major national emergencies produced additional surges. Debt rose dramatically during World War II, and borrowing again accelerated during the financial crisis of 2008. And yes, the COVID-19 pandemic, when Congress approved trillions of dollars in emergency spending and economic assistance, and how much of that was wasted. The journal noted that the federal government has run an annual deficit every year since 2001, meaning it has consistently spent more than it has collected in revenue and has had to borrow to cover the difference. The result is that borrowing that once was heavily associated with wars and economic crisis has become a persistent feature of the federal budget. The New York Times reported Wednesday that the government is on track to borrow more than $2 trillion this year. A growing share of that borrowing reflects the cost of servicing debt accumulated in previous years. Interest payments have become one of the largest expenses in the federal budget, with the cost rising as the government carries more debt and refinances older obligations at higher rates. The fiscal pressures are increasingly visible in the bond market. The yield on the 30-year Treasury recently reached roughly 5.3%, its highest level in nearly 2 decades. Higher Treasury yields increase the government's cost of issuing and refinancing debt and can also influence borrowing costs for households and businesses. Still, investors continue to regard Treasury securities as among the world's most important and liquid financial assets. The United States also retains a major advantage from the dollar's role as the world's dominant reserve currency, which helps sustain demand for Treasury debt even as the government's borrowing needs grow. The long-term outlook, however, is becoming more challenging. The Congressional Budget Office projects that if current laws remain in place, publicly held debt could rise to about 120% of the GDP within a decade and roughly 175% within 30 years, according to the Journal. Much of that projected increase is tied to the growing costs of Social Security, Medicare, and other programs, as well as rising interest expenses. The Trump administration is confronting those long-standing pressures while pursuing its own economic and fiscal priorities. President Donald Trump has made reducing government's waste, encouraging economic growth, and strengthening federal finances among the administration's goals. The administration's Department of Government Efficiency efforts sought significant reductions in federal spending, while the administration has also pursued increased revenue through tariffs. The New York Times reported that the administration has claimed more than $200 billion in DOGE-related savings, although the Government Accountability Office has raised questions about the reliability and transparency of some of those estimates. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent set a goal of reducing the federal deficit to 3% of GDP by 2028. Not pretty. You go to the debt clock and just look at that. It gets sadder and sadder and sadder. So what does that mean for us? The Americans, we don't get the debt bill in the mailbox, but it hits us hard, indirectly as well as directly. The borrowing, interest, all those things that go up, and it makes it harder for us to pay things like our mortgage and to even buy a home. Those things will continue to rise. So, to give an example, a $400,000 30-year mortgage at 6% carries a principal and interest payment of about $2,398 a month. At 7%, the payment rises to about $2,661, roughly $263 more every month, or more than $94,000 in additional payments over the life of the loan. The national debt would not by itself cause mortgage payments to make that 1 percentage point jump, but higher long-term Treasury yields are one factor that make mortgages more expensive. So it definitely hits us. Auto loans are affected by that. Credit card rates are tied to those. Someone carrying a $10,000 credit card balance, even a modest increase in the interest rate can mean hundreds of dollars more in annual interest charges. So it's just look at more and more is going to be coming out of your paycheck and hitting your savings probably as well as some of these things escalate. All right, moving to the Middle East, as always, it's on our radar, obviously, with all this going on. Iran's defiant leaders have considered attacking U.S. military targets in Europe. The Financial Times reported Iranian forces have assessed possible strikes on American assets in southeastern Europe. Listen, this is all they have left, really. They can't control the strait. It's just threats and these things, but they have to take those serious. Obviously, Russia and China and others are helping them get parts and even drones and missiles. But the effect of the blockade is having an effect. But they have included southeastern Europe, including Bulgaria. If the president escalates the war, 2 regime leaders told the Financial Times. Cyprus also has been considered a potential target for retaliation in the event of another U.S. offensive. The threats raise the prospect of Tehran expanding the conflict beyond the Middle East as the Trump administration maintains pressure on the Islamic regime. Iran has examined U.S. assets in Bulgaria after the NATO member approved the use of Besmer Air Base by American refueling aircraft. Bulgaria's parliament authorized up to 8 U.S. KC-135 aircraft and 250 military personnel to deploy there through October 1st in support of U.S. operations in the Middle East, according to the country's official parliamentary record. Iranian commanders also have examined attacking subsea fiber optic cables in the Strait of Hormuz and if fighting intensifies. Regime insiders say Tehran's response will depend on Washington's actions, with one warning: Iran will place no limits on its response to U.S. aggression. Trump said Tuesday that there were no talks or conversations going on or scheduled with Tehran as negotiations over reopening the Strait of Hormuz remain stalled. Iran's increasingly aggressive posture comes after its leadership strengthened hardliners in top security positions. The Wall Street Journal was reporting that on Sunday that Tehran had expanded missile and drone production, increased the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps influence over the regular military, and prepared allied militias for a potential wider confrontation. The regime has already warned Bulgaria that allowing American forces to use this territory could carry consequences, as we've seen in the last news bite there. So again, more threats, and it continues to go on. U.S. forces hold open Hormuz as Iran targets tankers. The U.S. military has helped keep hundreds of millions of barrels of oil moving through the strait during the war with Iran, providing a critical outlet for Gulf crude, even as Iranian forces continue attacking commercial vessels. Since early May, American forces have assisted roughly 1,000 vessels carrying about 500 million barrels of crude through the strategic waterway, according to CENTCOM. And also, they have been demining that area because Iran mined a lot of it. There's been a lot of exploding of those and demining and disarming those as well. They are assisting these commercial vessels with warships, aircraft, and helicopters to defend against Iranian attacks. Shipping analyst Michelle Weiss-Bachmann of Windward told the New York Times that about 4 million barrels of oil a day moved through the southern corridor in June, rising to roughly 5 million barrels a day in July. Before the war, about 15 million barrels of crude passed through Hormuz each day, according to the International Energy Agency. So it is far below normal, but ships are getting through. Last week, Trump said the U.S. had total control of the strait and wrote on Truth Social, his social media outlet, in capital letters, "I think we will keep it." He likes to throw those zingers out there. And so they continue to push for that. U.S. warns Siemens devices can be hacked amid fears Iran is breaching water plants. This has become a concern. Also, there was the energy gentleman who talked about that if they attacked up to 9 specific targets on our energy grid, that it could be shut down for weeks and months. I don't know if that's the type of information we need to be giving out, but he did say that. Several U.S. government agencies warned that unidentified hackers are trying to breach devices made by Siemens that are used to monitor and operate water facilities and other critical infrastructure systems. Now's the time to tighten these up big time because we got to have clean water, and so this is a bigger threat than anything they could throw at us missile wise here in America. The advisory described an active threat to all Siemens S7 series programmable logic controllers across multiple critical infrastructure sectors, including manufacturing, energy, water, and wastewater, chemical, food, and agricultural facilities. According to the warning issued by the National Security Agency, FBI, Department of Energy, Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, and the Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. Depending on specific circumstances, compromises of these devices could lead to disruption of critical processes, safety incidents, downtime, or equipment damage comprised of sensitive data, compliance violations, and cascading impacts across interconnected systems. Siemens did not immediately respond to a request for comment. According to the advisory, the hackers are using AI to dramatically reduce the technical expertise and time required to develop exploits that can successfully compromise the systems. Maybe we need to go back to something more less technological, just because in these days and times, we have to protect that. So we will see. Rick Scott has said, Republican Florida, that more military action may be needed to decisively resolve the current conflict. He said Trump may have little choice but to renew strikes after diplomatic efforts failed to produce a lasting agreement with Tehran. I think he's going to have to, Scott told an interviewer when asked whether Trump should follow through with his threat to destroy Iranian infrastructure if Tehran continues targeting ships in the Strait. He's a president that doesn't like war. None of us do, Scott said, the Washington Examiner reported. There's a president that doesn't want to put troops in harm's way. None of us do. He said that Scott said that Trump gave diplomacy an opportunity, but Iran, quote, walked away from it, end quote, arguing that the president eventually may have to take further action to destroy Tehran's ability to produce weapons. He said the action could come within the next 30 days or so, stressing Trump has access to intelligence that he does not and will not continue pursuing diplomacy where possible. He said Scott said has consistently backed Trump's hardline against Tehran. On Tuesday, post on X, Scott said he was grateful to have a commander-in-chief who wants Iran, or who understands, Iran can never, in capital letters, have a nuclear weapon, thanking Trump for always putting the safety of Americans first. So that continues to be the deal. Russia's reportedly resupplying Iran. Let's move on. Trump is signaling a new meeting with Kim Jong-un, which he calls some kind of a friend. He said that they have 57 very powerful nuclear weapons is what they're holding. The remarks come as Trump ordered Pentagon officials to cut shorter joint exercises with the South Korean military, writing in a Sunday social media post that they sent a message to North Korea that was totally inappropriate and hostile to a country that, as long as Donald J. Trump has been president, has been unthreatening and respectful. During Trump's first term, Kim called Trump a mentally deranged U.S. dotard and threatened that he had use of a nuclear button on his desk. The leaders' relationship cooled after face-to-face meetings in 2018 and 2019, including a brief exchange at the DMZ between the Koreas, in which Trump became the first sitting U.S. president to step into North Korean territory. He says, I know Kim Jong-un very well, and he's going to be fine as long as we have a smart president. The president told reporters Wednesday, during a tour of the helipad he is constructing at the White House historic South Lawn. The fact that I get along with him, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. He has 57 very powerful nuclear weapons. They should never have been allowed to have it. If I were president, I would have allowed it, but he's got them. There have been varying estimates of experts over the years on how many nuclear weapons North Korea has. In June, the Stockholm International Peace Institute Research Institute, estimated that North Korea has possibly assembled around 60 warheads and possesses enough fissile material to produce at least 30 more. That is not a good thought, I would think. Let's see here. U.S.-Canada deal to cut top-line auto tariffs to 15%. It's under negotiation, expected to cut the president's top-line tariff rates on Canadian-built cars and trucks to 15% from 25%, and half the top-line tariff rates on Canadian steel and aluminum to 25%, a source familiar with the talk said. The reduction in steel tariffs is also expected to come with a volume quota arrangement, but details were not immediately available. So there has been talk in the news of late about easing of the tariffs with Canada, and we can continue to see that they're working at. The president says that there is a deal at hand, so we should be hearing about that very, very soon. Moving to elections, the midterms coming up, Jim McLaughlin is a Republican pollster. He told Newsmax that Byron Donalds is a great candidate for Florida governor, but when the GOP can't take anything for granted as self-described socialist candidates rack up wins in Democratic primaries. Appearing on Newsmax's Wake Up America, McLaughlin said he isn't concerned about Florida overall and expects Republicans to unite behind Donalds, but said the left's success in Democratic primaries should serve as a warning. Quote, you do get concerned about when gets concerned because when the Democrats have nominated a radical socialist in Angie Nixon in the U.S. Senate race, look, they're right there, he said. They're winning these primaries. He pointed to New York, where he said 3 incumbent Democrats endorsed by House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries lost their primaries. People say that socialism is on the march and people are going to wake up. They are winning. They have a beachhead in the Democratic primary. That means Republicans can't just assume that voters will reject socialist candidates at the ballot box. You can't take anything for granted here. But I think now that the Republican Party is going to be united, I think you're going to see folks rallying around Byron Donalds, and I think Byron's a great candidate. He also sounded the alarm of the rising national debt and affordability concerns facing Americans, arguing that the policies being pushed by socialists would only make the nation's fiscal problems worse. There's no question it's a concern. The American people just got destroyed by Joe Biden's spending and debt and whatnot. It's a serious issue, but those socialists are going to make it worse. He said proposals such as Medicare for all would add to those problems, while pointing to Democrat-run states and cities as examples of where left-wing economic policy, can lead. Just look at the blue states and the blue cities across the country. Look at California. Look at Illinois. Look at New York City. He said their brand of politics, it just doesn't work, and it will bankrupt America. And we may be already there just about anyway. Let's get a couple more items in. Let's go to sports. And I wanted to look at a couple things. Look at standings, first of all. In the baseball, the Rays are up by 5 on the Yankees in the American League East. The White Sox are up by 4 over the Twins. In the Central and the West, the Astros only up by 1 over the Rangers and 4 over the Mariners. Moving over the National League, the Braves have cooled a little bit. The Phillies have gotten hotter. Braves have lost 3. The Phillies have won 5. That lead is now 5 Braves over Phillies. In the Central, the Brewers are up by 5 over the Cubs. And in the West, the Dodgers are easily ahead of the Padres and Diamondbacks, who are behind 8.5 games, and 9.5 respectively. Moving to the NFL, another bad news of injury for the 26th season for the Houston Texans. One of their top receivers, still thinking baseball, Jaden Higgins suffered a torn ACL in Tuesday's joint practice with the Las Vegas Raiders, and he will be out for the season. That is a shame. He was the number 34th overall pick in the 2025 NFL draft. He caught 41 passes for 525 yards and 6 touchdowns as a rookie. So always hate to see that. There are a number of injuries around the league. Also, there's going for the Saints, one of their big, well-known running back is going to be out for 8 games, for a month to start the season, Alvin Kamara. So that's tough news for them, but they'll get him back. And speaking of those Saints, the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, talking about, which is Brian Schottenheimer, talked about the brawl with the Fight Club between the Cowboys and the Saints. He said he couldn't focus on how his club fared during Tuesday's joint practice due to the repeated scuffles that marked the session. Right now, I'm in charge of the Fight Club, Schottenheimer quipped via the Dallas Morning News. They were reportedly at least a handful of fights in Tuesday's practice, enough that reporters couldn't keep track of everything happening in the melees. Helmets were pitched, punches tossed. At one point, Saints tight end Brock Reichsteiner, son of WWE Hall of Famer Scott Steiner, grabbed New York Cowboy safety Jalen Thompson and body slammed him to the turf. The repeated Donnie Brooks led to Schottenheimer and Saints coach Kellen Moore to discuss whether to call practice. Quote, we kind of agreed that if a couple of other things happened, we would cancel it. But they worked through it. Again, they settled into it, but again, there's a discipline element to playing this football game. And unfortunately, we didn't handle that very well today. It's a delicate balance for coaches who want to see fire from players, but don't need that many scuffles getting in the way of work being done. We're going to play on the edge, and we're not going to take, we'll say, crap from anybody, Schottenheimer said. But at the same time, I don't think the Saints were the only ones stirring up the crowd. I think we might have been stirring it up as well. It was a sloppy practice all in all, and it's got to get better. The Saints will take part in a joint practice against the Rams on Thursday before Saturday's preseason game against the Cowboy in L.A. The Cowboys take on the Cardinals in Arizona on Saturday night. And let's end on some good news. This is some great news. This is the first ever. The world-renowned Zion National Park has become the first to offer an all-terrain wheelchair for disabled visitors who want to visit the Canyon System's trails. The equipment was made available thanks to a charitable nonprofit, which used donated funds to purchase the wheelchair on behalf of Zion. In going through the process of outfitting and delivery, the wheelchair's manufacturer, Extreme Modus, realized that Zion was about to be the first of America's national parks with its own off-road mobility options. It's been almost 2 years in the making, said Extreme Modus Chief Business Development Officer Kenny Jardine. Zion actually got the chair in July of last year from a donor through a nonprofit called 2 Live 4, who was able to come in and donate the money to be able to make this possible. Co-founder of Extreme Modus, Ryan Grassley, developed the chair model over the last 7 years, while taking a friend of his with cerebral palsy named Sam to all but one of Utah's National Park Service properties. So I want to show you a picture of that. Hopefully, let me get this in a better location where I can do that a little easier. And I want to give you a little quick see of, let's see there. Hopefully I won't cause any new or noises there. And I want to show you this real quick. You get this at goodnews.com. And let's see here. There it is. And it's on the screen right now. And there it is right there. Not the best picture, but you see the big wheels here, place for the legs, and there's brakes on the back of it. So, good for them. That's some good news, and I'm glad to hear that. And that's awesome. Help these people be able to go and do things more and more, even with the restrictions they have, is an amazing thing. Hey, may God bless you, and we'll see you again next time on the Wolf Report from the Wolf Nation Network. I'm Dave, the Cornbread Man. Thank you so much. Remember, we're on Roku now. Go to roku.com and just look for the Wolf Nation Network. You'll see that wolf logo. It's right behind me here. You'll see that, and it's outlined in red around the edges, and you can't miss it. People have told me it's so very easy to find. If you don't have Roku, there's a way to download and still get that app if you don't have a Roku device. But millions of people do. So we hope you'll download it. When we go live, it goes live. And we're working on getting our video on demand set up on there so you can look at past programs. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Take care. God bless.